In this dream, it seems I had a mission or objective of a kind. Here I would find myself in a 2-layered building. It was very lavish, very delightfully decorated, gleaming white, and with nothing that would be unappealing to the eye. I seemed to know what I was doing and why I was here, so I was very much connected and standing with my real self. The entire place served a dual purpose. Guests and individuals would arrive at the bottom floor, which served as the eating area. When their meals were complete, they would transition upstairs to the second floor, which was a maze of corridors that ultimately converged on large open sections. Seems the visitors assumed or were informed that after their undoubtedly very exquisite meal, they would be taken upstairs for something equally as emotionally appealing. I'm not sure exactly what the guests thought they were going to receive on floor number 2, but it wasn't quite what they had been led to believe. For on the upper floor were these raptor-like creatures, and they lurked in the large open areas that the unsuspecting guests would be led to. The guests then would meet an ill fate. They would be attacked and consumed by the raptors. So effectively, this place was a trap, baiting people in with the promise of fine dining and even more delights beyond that. But in actuality, it was a setup, and the visitors were but food for these raptors. So it seems I had somehow infiltrated this operation, and I had the position of a butler or waiter. There was no build-up or precursor to where I found myself. I was just there, and in the midst of my mission, it would seem. My real self going about it, and the personal self was on board, as it always will be, and confused and trying to figure it out. I was upstairs before the guests were to arrive. I wasn't supposed to be there, for if I was seen by the raptors, my cover would be blown. I would give the game away, or at least raise their suspicions, as my duties as a waiter should not involve my being beyond the bottom section, the dining area. Nevertheless, I was familiarizing myself with the layout, peeking down the maze of corridors, carefully investigating all the rooms, as there seemed to be bedrooms up here too, sleeping quarters and such. I knew this place as I'd been here before, it seemed. It did seem very familiar, but perhaps a time ago, so I was re-familiarizing myself. I knew where the raptors were. They waited in the open areas that the guests would be led to, so I was careful not to go near these, only as close as I deemed necessary to be certain that the layout was known to me. The guests would dine and be led up here. Some individuals would lead them to their demise. I imagine the individuals doing this would look very human as the waiter I had replaced. Everything would look very normal and fine until the doors to the open raptor-infested areas were opened, of course. I was going to be joined by a group later, and timing it just so, we would sneak upstairs when the dined guests were taken. We would deal with the individuals leading the guests to their doom and sneak the guests out of the building, saving them from the raptors. Because the guest quota was divided in half. The first half arrived, and once dined were led upstairs, and the second half filed in and would be seated in the dining area. I figured that my group would have enough time to seat the guests, then catch up with those being led upstairs to their slaughter, save them, and bring them back downstairs, then gather up all those waiting for their meals, and whisk them all to safety and beyond this place. And so it was on. The experience jumped a few scenes to the point where the first batch of guests had completed their meals and were going up the stairs, led by their very charming hosts. I had the second group of guests seated, and so far all was going to plan. While I was seating them, I noticed a very expensive car pull up outside the building, like the sort of car you might see a president being driven in, or perhaps royalty, as it indeed turned out to be. The Queen of England stepped from the car and approached the dining area, dressed as you would normally see her on television, and presenting the world with her usual harmless and disarming appearance. This was not going to script now. She would approach and hover in the doorway. She seemed rather disinterested in anything, not even giving me a glance, but whispered something in one of the guests' ears, a guest seated nearest to the doorway. The Queen then glided away with equal indifference, returned to her car, and departed. The one she had spoken with became glassy-eyed, almost as though hypnotized. And then she would stand and begin causing disruption, shrieking and upturning chairs. I had now to deal with this situation, where I should have been upstairs and rescuing the first batch of unwitting guests. But I would have some assistance at this point, as I was pointing out to the other unsettled diners how I suspected the Queen had hypnotized the unruly guest somehow, a subliminal suggestion or other. They all looked bewildered. I had the sense that somehow they hadn't even seen the Queen, for they didn't react to her presence when she was here as individuals would when confronted with royalty. There was an individual amongst the guests I had not noticed before, but when she spoke, I had the impression she was a real guide, and she had been here to watch and afford help if required, and she would do so now. She produced a musical instrument, a kind of flat keyboard-like device, with some raised sections, and waving her hands across this, it would produce the most delightful sound, and she would sing along, with this voice and song of equal quality. The effect was instantaneous. The deranged guest settled at once, and was becalmed. Now my mission could continue, but where were the others that were supposed to join me at this moment? They were nowhere to be seen, and moments were passing, the guests upstairs being led closer to their fate. This is where the dream would end. On the verge of executing stage 2, the rescue bid, but waiting for the others of my group, who seem to have been delayed. Perhaps part 2 will unveil itself somewhere down the road a ways. And so, what we have here are the reptilians, and they are evidently eating people, which is what they have a tendency to do. The raptors in this dream would be the reptilians. I'm uncertain why I referred to them as raptors, as I wouldn't actually lay eyes on them in this dream. But as I said, the place seemed familiar, as though I'd been here before. Maybe I had. Maybe I was once one of the guests in some other dimension or lifetime, and met my end here. Or that the real self knows far more than the personal self, perhaps, and tends to just operate as it will, dragging the personal self along, that hasn't any inkling as to what's occurring, and will question as to how I know what I do, and why I call them raptors, etc. In fact, I could picture them as just that, the raptors you would see in Jurassic Park, the movie, for example. And so, in that form, yes, but the demonstration, as is often the case, of seeing dinosaurs on the real side, is that they represent the reptilians. Further confirmation of this being a reptilian operation was the arrival of the Queen, who is, of course, as all the world controllers are, a reptilian. Seems she was here to disrupt my mission of rescue, but do so in a way as to not alarm or concern the human guest cattle. Imagine were a squad of reptilians to burst in and physically accost me. The guests might surely be suspicious then. There would be panic, and everyone undoubtedly would try and leave. A far better ploy, then, perhaps, to delay me, that I can't reach the guests upstairs in time, as I had to deal with this situation here, as the Queen whispered some witch-like command into the ear of a guest, and had that guest going berserk. And the guides always are close at hand, in this case, watching all along, and I had not noticed. They tend to let the new students handle themselves and situations alone as much as possible, that we become better able and adept at dealing with creation as we go about our adventures, and sharing of the ear's activities, but they are never far, and on this case she would step in and return the situation to a degree of normality for my mission to continue on. I would say her musical instrument and song was along the lines of the musics of the ears, for it was very delightful, but perhaps not the full extent of that which you might hear with the ears, as it may have been too much for those unaccustomed to such sounds. These guests here were not aware individuals by any stretch, just finding themselves in this predicament, and too much exposure to sounds and such of life levels and the real universes would be overwhelming for them, or they may not have been able to recognize them. So possibly then music of the ears, but reduced to a state that this individual can recognize and hear, but is still effective enough to break the spell of the Queen. So where exactly was I? Was this a place off planet where individuals were taken to be eaten? Was it made to look fine on the surface, the marketing ploy of everything in creation that is not what it seems, or perhaps more a demonstration then of creation? How everything on the planet looks very fine, and everybody therefore agrees to the marketing front of all they literally perceive. But what they are agreeing with are ideas of demise, control, restriction, and are tap-lined accordingly. And the tap-lines are planted in them on the astral by the reptilians, which supply the reptilians with their energy. The agreeable masses then are not only restricted and limited through the ideas they agree with, but are energetically drained through the tap lines and become ill, and ultimately death finds them. So this entire dream was perhaps a demonstration of a creation. All the individuals on the bottom floor, on the physical life level, and unable to see past the delightfully packaged marketing fronts they have been presented with. Due to their literalized programmed selves, they cannot see beyond what their literal senses reveal to them, and are in agreement with these marketing fronts, which are in essence agreement to ideas that keep them trapped in the lower levels of the creational matrix. And the second level of this building would represent then the astral level, where the tap lining occurs, courtesy of the reptilians, as they drain the unconscious and unsuspecting individuals from this level unseen and unrecognized by them, demonstrated here by the raptors literally eating them. And we can see how limited in their recognitional awareness they are, for even when the Queen arrived, seems they could not see her, a little like the masses, who cannot even recognize the fact that the planet is being polluted and destroyed. They can't even see the dangers of the 5G, etc. For many, the programmed agreement is so absolute that they see but fractions of what their world actually is, a human farming planet. For yes, reptilians physically eat people and energetically drain them from the astral, and this real side dream could be either. And how subtle the Queen is to interfere with my mission, again to not draw attention of the masses, to perpetuate their unconscious consideration of how they think the world is. Seems I was there to put a stop to this particular reptilian meal for whatever reason. Maybe a demonstration of how we are trying to bring about a worldwide wake-up and are attempting to bring awareness to people as to how the world is not what they think it is, including the tap lining, amongst other things, that goes on. My going through this experience is effectively my acknowledging and demonstrating my willingness to play a part in it, becoming more aware through the experiences myself, waking up others, and jumping into the potential confrontations resultingly. My group that was delayed may be a further demonstration that we as individuals have to go about our process ourselves. We have to do it. We have to take the time to recognize the true reality and activate the awareness required to do so. So, quite possibly, my group will not arrive, and I must deal with this situation myself, and with a greater risk-taking, a scarier situation then for the personal self. It has us more so stepping beyond the comfort zone of the personal self, and activates awareness even more, which affords us a greater recognition of the is. And that concludes that one.
Oh, another fun adventure, Kevin. And yes, and the dining does sound good. Yes, thank you so much for sharing. That's great.